5 years after their divorce, a mafia boss walks into an emergency room and freezes. His ex-wife stands there, with a little boy fighting for his life. The boy has his eyes, his blood, his scar. But when the truth unfolds, he'll learn she didn't betray him to destroy him. She betrayed him to save his soul. And this time, love will cost them everything. The night hung over the city like a velvet shroud, punctuated only by the distant wail of sirens. Bosch Romano's boots clicked against the rain-slicked pavement, each step heavy with purpose and a weight that had nothing to do with the storm. His coat, dark as the secrets he carried, flapped slightly in the wind as he approached the hospital. Every streetlight seemed to bend around him, casting shadows that whispered his name. Bosch didn't care for whispers. He cared for results. Inside the emergency room, chaos spilled over the sterile floors. Nurses shouted numbers, doctors barked orders, and the scent of antiseptic mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Bosch pushed through the sliding doors, his presence commanding immediate attention. People instinctively stepped back, sensing the predator in the calm storm of his movements. Even in a room built for saving lives, his reputation killed fear like it was nothing. He wasn't there for drama. He had come for one of his injured men, a low-level soldier caught in the crossfire of a rival gang's ambush. But fate had a different plan. His eyes scanned the room, sharp, precise, calculating. And then he stopped. There she was. Julia? His Julia? Or at least the woman who had once carried his name and his love like it was part of her very skin. Her hair was shorter now, a blunt cut that framed her thin face. Years had etched lines where smiles and laughter once lived, but the storm in her eyes, that storm was still hers. It hit him like a knife to the chest, twisting and tearing at memories he had tried to burn away. She knelt beside a hospital bed, trembling as though the world itself threatened to break her in half. And on that bed, a small boy, pale, fragile, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven rhythms. Bosch's gaze zeroed in on a scar near the child's eyebrow, the same scar he had carried since childhood, a mark he knew intimately. His voice, low and broken, trembled for the first time in years. "Who's the boy, Julia?" Her lips quivered. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried to form words that wouldn't come. Her hands shook, clutching the sheets over the child as though the fabric alone could keep him alive. "You should leave," she whispered, almost inaudible. But the fear in her voice carried more weight than any order he had ever given. Bosch's heart slammed against his ribs, unrelenting, deafening. He stepped closer, the world narrowing to the space between her and that small boy. His eyes, cold and merciless for decades, softened in a way he hadn't anticipated. She could not hide the truth from him. He would see it, he always did. A sudden shout cut through the tension. "Doctor, we need O-negative blood, now!" Bosch froze. O-negative. His blood type. The exact one. The one that could keep the boy alive. Time slowed. He felt the room tilt around him, the chaos fading to a blur as every instinct screamed at him. Without hesitation, he rolled up his sleeve, exposing a forearm that had broken more bones than he cared to count. He didn't wait for permission. He growled, low and commanding, "Take mine." Julia's eyes widened. "No, Bosch, you can't." He silenced her with a look that had toppled armies, that had made men kneel without question. "Now." The nurses flinched, careful hands drawing his blood, each drop sliding into a tube that could mean life or death. Bosch's mind, though focused, was a storm of memories. He saw her walking away that night, vanishing from his life like smoke. No goodbye, no explanation, just the hollow ache of loss that had haunted him every day since. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe. The boy's tiny fingers twitched, and Bosch's chest ached with a protective fury he hadn't felt in years. He couldn't lose him. Not now. Not like this. Julia's voice trembled beside him. He's my son. The words fell like a hammer. Bosch's eyes narrowed. Our son? He asked, disbelief cracking through his controlled facade. She looked away, ashamed. He doesn't have a father. Bosch's hand clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles whitened. Then why does he have my blood? Julia froze, tears spilling freely now, each one a silent confession. She had carried this secret for years, fearing the man who had once been her world. But the question had found its way to her, relentless, unforgiving. The monitors beeped erratically. The boy's tiny chest twitched dangerously. Bosch's heart lurched. He stepped closer, pressing a hand to the child's frail shoulder. Stay with me, kid. Don't you dare leave me. Julia's whisper was a raw, broken plea. I did what I had to keep him alive. Bosch's mind raced. Every scenario, every enemy, every betrayal he had faced in his life seemed to converge into this one moment. He could feel the weight of 5 lost years pressing down on him and the fragile hope that this boy represented. A nurse adjusted the IV. The boy's lips turned slightly blue, and Bosch's hands gripped the sides of the bed. Hold on, you're not going anywhere, not on my watch. Julia glanced up, eyes meeting his, fear and guilt mingling in a storm as intense as the one they had once shared. I didn't know how to tell you, she confessed. Bosch's gaze burned into her. You left me in the dark, and now? A sudden beep, a warning from the monitors, made both of them jump. The boy's heart faltered for a fraction of a second, a cruel reminder of the fragility of life. Bosch cursed under his breath, fists clenched, teeth grinding. Stay alive, he whispered fiercely. Do you hear me? Stay alive. Julia bit her lip, silent tears dripping onto her hands. Bosch's mind darted to the past, to the night she walked out, to the love he had tried to bury beneath vengeance, beneath power, beneath everything that defined him. All of it collided in this one hospital room. Another nurse approached, voice urgent. We need to monitor him closely. The transfusion, it's stabilizing him, but he's critical. Bosch nodded, his hand still pressed to the boy's chest. His eyes, dark and sharp, never left Julia's face. 5 years, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. 5 years I've been blind, and now I see everything. A soft moan escaped the boy. Bosch's heart skipped, and he glanced at Julia. Relief flickered in her eyes for a heartbeat, quickly replaced by fear. He's so weak, she whispered. Bosch's jaw tightened. Then we fight, all of us. Another beep, irregular this time, made Bosch glance at the monitors again. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. The boy coughed, small and ragged, and Bosch's fingers tightened slightly. You're stronger than you look, he whispered, almost to reassure himself as much as the child. Julia swallowed, trying to regain composure. I didn't want you to know like this, she admitted, voice breaking. Bosch's eyes softened, the rage he carried for years mingling with a sudden, protective tenderness. Sometimes life doesn't wait for the right time. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway. Someone dropped a tray. The boy flinched, and Bosch's instincts screamed. Don't let anything happen to him, he muttered fiercely. Julia bit her lip, nodding, her hands trembling as she brushed the boy's hair from his forehead. Bosch watched her, noting every detail. The way her shoulders shook, the strain in her eyes, the silent torment she carried. The blood continued to drip into the boy's vein, each second stretching into eternity. Bosch's mind wandered briefly to the enemies who had hunted him, to the life he had built on fear and power. And yet here, in this sterile hospital room, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the fragile boy and the woman who had once been his world. The boy's monitor beeped steadily now. Bosch exhaled sharply, a small victory in the storm of uncertainty. Julia let out a shuddering breath, leaning back against the bed for support. Bosch's eyes never left her. 5 years, he repeated softly, and now I'm here, and I will protect him. No one will take him. Her gaze met his, a silent understanding passing between them. Fear, regret, and an unspoken bond forged in the crucible of loss and love. A sudden ring of a phone somewhere in the hospital made both of them start. Bosch's hand instinctively went to his coat pocket, fingers brushing the cold metal of his gun. His instincts screamed danger, and Julia's eyes widened in silent terror. "Stay here," he said firmly, not waiting for an answer. His gaze swept the room once more, vigilant, calculating, ready. Another beep, irregular, jolted them both again. The boy coughed violently, a sharp gasp cutting through the room. Bosch's hand shot forward, steadying him, whispering, "You're not leaving me. Not tonight. Not ever." Julia's lips trembled as she watched him, realizing that this man, the man who had once ruled the city with an iron fist, now lived for this child, for this fragile moment. The night outside pressed against the glass. Sirens fading, but the storm within the room far from over. Bosch's eyes narrowed, a silent promise forming. Whoever had endangered them, whoever had brought them here, would pay, and no one, not even fate itself, would take this boy from him. The overhead lights flickered violently, casting the room into brief darkness. When they came back on, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. Bosch tensed, instinct screaming. Someone was watching them. 2. Bosch didn't hesitate. The world narrowed to the hospital bed, the fragile boy, and the woman he had once loved with a fierceness that had nearly destroyed him. He rolled up his sleeve, veins bulging beneath hardened skin, muscles tensing as he growled, "Take mine!" Julia's hand flew toward him instinctively, shaking, trembling as though she could physically hold him back. "No, Bosch, you can't." Her voice was barely audible, fragile against the storm that had always defined him. But Bosch's eyes, dark and merciless, pinned her to the floor. His glare cut through the fear, through the hesitation, through every layer of guilt she had built up over 5 long years. "Now," he said, low, commanding, impossible to ignore. The nurses flinched but obeyed, drawing his blood into the sterile tube, each red drop falling like a tiny promise of life. Bosch's mind began to spin backward, memories colliding violently with the present. He remembered that night with terrifying clarity. The night she had walked away, leaving nothing behind but a divorce paper and a heartbeat he could no longer feel. No goodbye, no letter. Just the hollow silence of a life abruptly ended in his hands. Anger had fueled him for years after that. Rage mingled with sorrow. He had burned cities with his enemies, carved his path through blood and fire, trying to erase the shadow she left behind. And now, here, 5 years later, that shadow had returned, small, fragile, and breathing. Barely. He swallowed hard. "Who is he?" The words slipped out, quiet, a dangerous softness hiding in the growl of his voice. Julia's lips parted, trembling violently. Her eyes glistened with tears she had held back for years, emotions she had buried deep, memories she had tried to erase. "He's my son," she whispered, barely audible, barely real. Bosch's pulse slammed through his chest, deafening him. Every muscle tightened, every breath shallow and sharp. "Our son?" The words came out harsh, disbelieving, tinged with something she could not name but recognized instantly. She turned away, unable to meet his gaze, hiding behind a fragile wall of shame and guilt. "He doesn't have a father," she said quietly, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Bosch's fist clenched so tightly his knuckles screamed white against his skin. His gaze went back to the tiny figure on the bed, a boy whose frailty made his chest ache in ways he hadn't known were possible. "Then why does he have my blood?" he demanded, voice low and lethal, carrying a storm of questions and suppressed fury. Julia froze, the question piercing her like a dagger. She had dreaded this moment, feared it for years. The truth had waited silently in the shadows, knowing Bosch's eyes would never be fooled, his instincts never dulled. And now the time had come. The monitors beeped erratically. Bosch's head snapped toward them, sharp, alert, instinct taking over. His hand rested firmly on the boy's chest, pressing down just enough to remind the fragile body that he would not let go. Another quick glance at Julia. Her face, pale under the harsh hospital lights, mirrored the storm inside him, a mirror of her fear and her regret. Bosch's voice dropped into a whisper, almost intimate, almost unrecognizable. "Stay alive," he said, words trembling with intensity, carrying both command and plea. Julia's hands tightened on the sheet, trembling as tears spilled silently onto the boy's hair. I did what I had to," she confessed, voice raw, almost breaking, "to keep him alive." Bosch's mind raced. Every memory of loss, betrayal, and power collided into this one moment. The weight of 5 lost years pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating, and yet here, hope lingered like a fragile flame in the dark. A nurse adjusted the IV, murmuring about vitals, her voice tense, her movements careful, almost reverent. The boy's lips were tinged with blue, and Bosch's hands gripped the sides of the bed, steady and unyielding, a pillar of unwavering force. "Hold on," he said, voice low and trembling. "You're not going anywhere, not on my watch." Julia glanced up, eyes meeting his, storm and regret interlaced, emotion raw, understanding unspoken yet perfectly clear. I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered, voice fragile as glass, breaking under the weight of all that had gone unsaid. Bosch's gaze burned into her, powerful, unrelenting. "You left me in the dark," he said slowly, deliberately, every word laced with tension. "And now?" A sudden beep from the monitor made them both jump, sharp and cruel, a reminder of how little time they had. How delicate this victory was. The boy's heart had faltered for a fraction of a second, and Bosch's instinct screamed, twisting into protective fury. "Stay alive," he whispered again, louder, fiercer, trembling with urgency. "Do you hear me? Stay alive." Julia's lips trembled as she tried to calm herself, tears dripping silently onto the bedsheet. Bosch's mind reeled, memories clashing violently. Her departure, the rage he had held inside, the life of emptiness he had built around her absence, all colliding with the fragile present. Another nurse approached, her voice urgent, a lifeline in the storm. "We need to monitor him closely. The transfusion, it's stabilizing him, but he's critical." Bosch nodded sharply, his hand still pressed firmly to the boy's chest. His eyes never left Julia's face, never letting go of her as if his gaze alone could anchor her, anchor the boy, anchor this fleeting moment of fragile hope. 5 years, he murmured, almost to himself, almost a confession. 5 years I've been blind, and now I see everything. The boy let out a soft moan, and Bosch's chest tightened, relief washing over him briefly, only to be replaced by a surge of protective rage. Julia exhaled shakily, relief flickering before terror replaced it, her whispered words full of fear. He's so weak." Bosch's jaw tightened, teeth grinding together. "Then we fight, all of us," he growled, a promise, a vow, a silent command to the fragile child fighting for life. Another irregular beep made him glance sharply at the monitors. A bead of sweat traced down his temple, the air around him heavy, almost suffocating, every second stretching into eternity. The boy coughed violently, a sharp, ragged sound, and Bosch's hand shot forward to steady him. "You're stronger than you look," he whispered, soft, fierce, and protective all at once. Julia swallowed hard, nodding faintly. trying to regain control over her shaking hands, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want you to know like this, she admitted, breaking with the weight of truth and fear combined. Bosch's eyes softened, the raw rage of years mingling with a protective tenderness that surprised even him. Sometimes life doesn't wait for the right time, he murmured, low, almost reverent. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway, a tray hitting the floor, jolting them both. The boy flinched violently and Bosch's instincts screamed, tension coiling through his body. "Don't let anything happen to him," he muttered, voice sharp, resolute, unyielding. Julia's hand shook as she brushed the boy's hair from his forehead, her tears silent but unstoppable. Bosch watched her every movement, noting the subtle tremor in her shoulders. The strain etched in her eyes, the silent torment she carried for years. The blood continued to drip steadily, red and warm, each second a lifeline stretching into eternity. Bosch's thoughts flicked briefly to enemies he had crushed, rivals who had fallen, the empire he had built with fear and blood. All of it irrelevant here, irrelevant now. The only thing that mattered was the small boy, the fragile thread of life in his hands, and the woman who had once been his world. The monitor beeped steadily, a rare and fragile victory. Bosch exhaled sharply, the tension in his chest easing slightly, and Julia leaned back against the bed, trembling but breathing. Bosch's eyes never left her, burning, fierce, and filled with unspoken vows. 5 years, he repeated softly, almost reverently, and now I'm here, and I will protect him. No one will take him. Her gaze met his, silent understanding passing between them, fear, regret, and love mingling in a delicate, dangerous bond forged in fire and time. A sudden ring of a phone somewhere in the hospital made them both start, sharp, intrusive, slicing through the fragile peace. Bosch instinctively went to his coat pocket, fingers brushing the cold steel of his gun, instinct screaming danger, and Julia's eyes widened, terror overtaking them. "Stay here," he said firmly, voice leaving no room for debate, not waiting for an answer. His gaze swept the room, vigilant, calculating, ready for whatever threat lurked beyond. Another irregular beep jolted them both, sharp and alarming. The boy coughed violently again, gasping, and Bosch's hand shot forward to steady him, whispering fiercely, "You're not leaving me. Not tonight, not ever." Julia's lips trembled as she realized the man who had once ruled the city with iron and blood now lived only for this fragile moment, this child, this fleeting heartbeat of hope. The night pressed against the hospital glass, sirens fading in the distance, but the storm within the room was far from over. Bosch's eyes narrowed, a silent promise forming like steel in his chest. Whoever had endangered them, whoever had brought them to this precipice, would pay. No one, not even fate itself, would take this boy from him. The boy's monitor suddenly beeped flat, a cruel, heart-stopping silence taking over the room. Bosch's breath caught, his hand tightening instinctively over the boy's chest. He whispered low and raw, "Don't you dare take him like you took her." The flatline beep of the monitor echoed in Bosch's ears. But the child's pulse slowly returned, a fragile rhythm that made Bosch exhale sharply, though the tension in his body did not ease. Hours of silence settled over the room, heavy, suffocating, filled with unspoken questions, fears, and regrets that pressed like a weight on Bosch's shoulders. Julia sat beside the bed, her hands pressed to her mouth, eyes red and swollen from crying, staring at the boy as if he were the only thing anchoring her to this world. Bosch's gaze shifted away from the boy and toward the window, the city lights shimmering dimly against the night sky. His mind, sharp and calculating even in exhaustion, was already piecing together the years of lies, the sudden disappearance, the secrets hidden behind her soft eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so unlike him in its hesitation, and finally spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. 5 years, Julia. You vanish. And now this? The words trembled, barely restrained rage underneath the surface, every syllable heavy with the weight of betrayal and love twisted together. Julia's shoulders shook as she turned toward him, the broken woman he had loved and lost, staring back with vulnerability and defiance. I had no choice, she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. Bosch pivoted, rage flickering through his gaze, barely held in check, his fists clenched, the familiar heat of anger rising beneath his control. You could have told me, he said, voice taut, low and dangerous, every word sharp. Told you what? Julia snapped, tears falling freely now, cascading down her cheeks like a river of unspoken truth. That your enemies were hunting me because I carried your child? Bosch froze in mid-step, the words crashing over him with the force of a bullet. His mind raced, 1,000 scenarios playing out like a reel. Threats, betrayals, enemies, assassins, all circling around them like vultures. His voice dropped, almost a whisper yet filled with intensity. You knew I would have protected you. She shook her head slowly, the gesture heavy with regret and pain. You can't protect what you destroy, she said, her words hitting him harder than any gunshot ever could. Bosch's chest tightened, his stomach twisting. He turned, back toward the boy, watching the fragile figure sleeping under the soft hum of machines, and felt the crushing weight of all the lost time. He had missed everything. Every scraped knee, every laugh, every breath he could never take credit for protecting. Why now? He asked, his voice raw, low, trembling with the ache of 5 wasted years. Julia's lips quivered, and she fought for composure, knowing every word she spoke now was fragile, carrying consequences she couldn't fully anticipate. Because someone found us, she admitted, voice breaking under the weight of truth. Bosch's dark eyes narrowed, scanning the room and the hallways beyond. Every instinct screamed danger, and the calm that had settled over the hospital was now shattered by the awareness that threats were closer than either of them had realized. His hand brushed the bed, steadying himself as his gaze swept the sterile floor, searching for movement, for shadows, for even the faintest whisper of attack. The room seemed to contract, walls pressing in, the air heavy, tense, almost crackling with the anticipation of violence. Julia's hands trembled as she gripped the bed sheets, and Bosch's eyes found her, dark and sharp, a storm of protective fury mixing with the raw pain of betrayal. Every second stretched impossibly long as they waited, as though time itself had slowed, holding its breath alongside them. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious, lights flashing against the rain-slicked streets, sirens faint in the distance, unaware of the danger lurking so close to the fragile room. Bosch turned, stepping toward the window, eyes scanning the streets below, calculating angles, entrances, exits, possibilities. His mind, trained for danger, raced with what-if scenarios, his instincts honed sharp as blades. Julia followed him with her gaze, voice trembling. Bosch, I never... Her words faltered, swallowed by fear, by the weight of everything they had lost, by the danger she knew now threatened them all. Bosch's jaw tightened, his gaze never leaving the darkened streets. He could feel the air shift, small movements imperceptible to anyone else, but to him they were screams in silence. Another sound, a distant clatter. A faint echo from a hall somewhere outside, and Bosch stiffened, muscles coiling like a predator about to strike. He turned sharply, his presence suffocating, commanding, full of the authority that had built empires and toppled men. Julia flinched, caught between relief that he was near and terror at the intensity in his gaze. Bosch's mind flicked back to every moment of their past. Love, betrayal, anger, fire, and blood. Every memory sharpening his instincts, heightening his focus. The boy stirred slightly in his sleep, and Bosch's hand shot out, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, protective, possessive, silent promise forming in his eyes. "You will stay with me," he whispered, low, hard but tender, a vow that carried more weight than any gun or threat he had ever wielded. Julia's lips trembled as she watched him, realizing in a single heartbeat that the man who had once ruled the city with iron and fury now lived only for this fragile life, for this child, and for the fragile chance of redemption. Bosch's fingers brushed hers briefly, a grounding touch, a silent communication. Stay, fight, survive. The monitor beeped steadily again, but the calm was false, deceptive, a fragile illusion that could shatter at any moment. He pivoted, eyes scanning every inch of the room, every shadow, every corner where danger might be waiting. Every muscle in his body was coiled, alert, ready. Julia swallowed hard, heart pounding, silent tears tracing wet paths down her cheeks. I didn't want it to be like this," she whispered, almost to herself, almost a confession to the universe. Bosch's voice cut through the tension, low and lethal, yet soft enough that only she could hear. "Life doesn't wait for timing, Julia, and neither do I." A sudden crash from the hallway made them both flinch. A tray dropped somewhere, echoing down the sterile corridors like a gunshot. Bosch spun toward the noise, every sense alert, instinct screaming danger. Julia grabbed the boy instinctively, pressing him closer, her nails digging into the sheets, tension radiating from her body in waves. Bosch's hand went immediately to his coat pocket, brushing the cold steel of his firearm. His gaze scanned the window, the hallways, every entrance, calculating, planning, ready to act. The boy stirred again, coughing softly, tiny chest rising and falling with shallow, fragile breaths. Bosch steadied him with a firm, possessive hand, whispering under his breath, "Not tonight, not you." Not ever. Julia's lips trembled, tears spilling freely, as she realized the man who had once instilled fear in every corner of the city now lived for this boy, for this fragile heartbeat, for this fleeting moment of hope. The night pressed against the hospital windows, wind rattling glass, rain pattering softly but insistently, a backdrop of calm before the storm. Bosch's eyes narrowed, scanning the darkened hallways beyond the room, every shadow a potential threat, every movement a silent warning. He could feel the weight of 5 lost years pressing down, a crushing force, but it only sharpened his focus, strengthened his resolve. Julia's hands shook in his presence, grasping the boy, her own safety forgotten in fear for him. Bosch's gaze softened just briefly toward her, protective and piercing all at once. A sudden metallic click echoed from the window, sharp and cruel, slicing through the room. Bosch spun, gun raised, instinct screaming as a bullet shattered the glass, shards flying dangerously close to Julia. She flinched, frozen with terror, barely breathing. Bosch's teeth clenched, rage surging, protective fire igniting every fiber of his being. He moved instantly, placing himself between her and the broken glass, eyes blazing, scanning every angle, calculating every potential threat. The boy whimpered softly, tiny voice lost beneath the storm of chaos and adrenaline, and Bosch pressed a hand gently to his chest, grounding him, whispering protective commands only he could understand. Julia's hands gripped the sheets, heart hammering, eyes wide, tears streaking her face. "Bosch," she breathed, voice trembling, almost pleading. Bosch's eyes never left the broken window, the shattered glass, the potential dangers lurking in the shadows beyond. His muscles tensed, every nerve screaming, calculating, predicting, planning. Another whisper, a movement, a shadow at the edge of his vision, and he spun, gun up, ready for the fight he knew was coming. Julia leaned back against the bed, clutching the boy, trembling violently, but her gaze never left Bosch. She knew in the depths of her being that he would not let harm come to them. Bosch exhaled sharply, a calculated, dangerous breath, preparing for the inevitable storm outside and within the room. His fingers tightened on the firearm, eyes scanning, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. The shadow at the far corner of the room shifted, barely perceptible, and Bosch's gaze snapped toward it, deadly and focused, sensing movement, sensing threat. Someone was inside, someone waiting, and the fight for their survival was only just beginning. 4. The hospital lights flickered violently, briefly plunging the ER into darkness. When the harsh fluorescent glow returned, Bosch's gaze snapped to the corner where the shadow had moved, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. The sudden realization that the threat was real, tangible, and lethal hit him like a hammer. Instinct took over. He grabbed Julia's wrist with a grip that was both commanding and protective, yanking her down behind a row of gurneys, shielding the boy pressed against her chest. Alarms and shouts erupted around them as medical staff scrambled, the chaos amplifying the tension. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear, mingling with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of hospital smoke from a broken lamp. Bosch's eyes scanned every doorway, every corner, every shadow, calculating, predicting, anticipating the enemy's next move. The shooter had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, a phantom in the night, leaving only the lingering dread of imminent danger. Julia's body shook violently against him, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. Bosch tightened his hold on her wrist, his jaw rigid with controlled fury. "You think this is coincidence?" he growled, voice low and lethal, eyes piercing the dimly lit hallways as he searched for movement, for any sign of the phantom attacker. The ER staff continued to scatter, moving patients, shouting instructions, their chaos only sharpening Bosch's focus. The boy whimpered softly, small, fragile, and vulnerable against Julia's chest. Bosch's hand moved instinctively, brushing the child's hair back, protective, possessive, unwavering. He could feel the familiar coil of rage and precision building inside him, the same drive that had built an empire and toppled countless enemies. His phone buzzed sharply in his coat pocket, slicing through the tension like a blade. He ignored it for a heartbeat, then pulled it out, thumb swiping quickly over the screen. The message that appeared made his stomach twist violently. "You can't protect what she sold." Bosch's eyes narrowed, dark and sharp as knives, pulse racing, instincts screaming danger. He looked down at Julia, whose face had gone pale, shadows of fear and guilt flickering across her delicate features. "What did you do, Julia?" His voice was low, almost a growl, threatening, hungry for answers, for truth, for betrayal or confirmation. Her silence was deafening, saying more than words ever could. Her lips pressed together, trembling, and Bosch could feel the weight of years, the weight of secrets, the weight of a life built on lies and desperate choices. "Tell me you didn't make a deal with them," he demanded, voice sharp, hard as steel, eyes scanning the hallways, muscles coiled, ready to strike at any shadow, any movement, any whisper of threat. Julia shook her head slowly, eyes downcast, unable to meet his gaze, a mixture of shame, fear, and survival etched into every line of her face. It was the only way to keep him alive, she confessed, her voice fragile, broken, heavy with the burden of her choices. Bosch stepped back slightly, disbelief and betrayal slicing through him like a blade, each step measured, deliberate, charged with the unspoken rage he had carried for years. "You sold me out to save our son?" he asked, voice raw, heavy, trembling with the intensity of 5 lost years and the weight of the fragile life before them. Julia swallowed hard, her throat moving as she spoke. Her voice almost a whisper. "No, Bosch, I sold myself." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, echoing off the sterile walls, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket of truth and horror. Bosch's mind went into overdrive, piecing together every possible angle, every reason, every scenario that could explain her confession. The ER seemed to shrink around them, the chaos dimming in comparison to the storm of emotions and danger now swirling in the room. Every muscle in Bosch's body tensed, his heartbeat pounding in his chest like a war drum, every nerve screaming alert. He stepped forward, reaching for her hands, trying to bridge the gap between disbelief and the raw, unbearable truth. Julia's hands trembled, reaching into the pocket of her coat, slowly withdrawing a small photograph, shaking under the weight of her own fear and guilt. Bosch's dark eyes snapped to the photo as she handed it to him, and his jaw tightened, his knuckles white, pulse hammering against his temples. The image was unmistakable. Her with the enemy boss smiling in a way that was both intimate and damning, a visual confession of every betrayal he had imagined and feared. Bosch's mind whirled, every instinct screaming danger, every memory of power, vengeance, and betrayal colliding violently with the fragile present. The boy whimpered softly, and Bosch instinctively pressed a hand to his chest, grounding him, his protective instincts consuming every other thought. Julia's voice trembled as she spoke again. I did it to survive, to protect him. Bosch's eyes never left hers, dark, piercing, filled with the storm of questions and rage that had been building for years. Another shout from the ER startled them. A nurse screaming about a gunshot heard somewhere in the hallway, and Bosch's body snapped into predator mode, every movement precise, controlled, deadly. Julia flinched, gripping the boy tighter, and Bosch's hand moved to her shoulder, steadying her, whispering a soft but commanding word, "Stay." The hospital air was thick with fear, with chaos, with the lingering scent of antiseptic and blood, and Bosch felt it all, every subtle vibration, every whispered footstep, every flicker of shadow, every breath that could carry danger. He pivoted sharply toward the sound, eyes scanning, muscles coiled, instincts sharp, every second stretching into a tense eternity. Julia's face was pale, eyes wide, tears streaming silently, reflecting the flashing lights of the ER, the chaos outside, the storm inside. Bosch's gaze softened ever so slightly toward her, understanding the impossible position she'd been forced into, even as fury burned just beneath the surface. The boy stirred slightly, tiny chest rising and falling in fragile, uneven rhythm, and Bosch's hand went to his forehead, brushing hair gently aside, a silent promise of protection, of life, of vengeance if needed. Bosch's phone buzzed again, and he glanced down, eyes scanning the text, his pulse spiking. More threats, more warnings, more puzzles he had to solve to ensure survival. Mini cliffhanger. Another shadow flickered in the far corner of the ER, a figure moving just outside the window, and Bosch's hand went instantly to his gun, eyes blazing, mind calculating every possible trajectory, every angle, every consequence. The storm had not ended. It had only just begun. He pressed himself closer to Julia, protective, lethal, ready to act before anyone else could, a silent vow forming in the depths of his soul. Whoever had come for them would regret the moment they crossed his path. Every heartbeat of the boy, every breath, every fragile moment now rested entirely in Bosch's hands, and he would not fail. The chaos around them became background noise, the shouts and alarms fading as Bosch's hyper-focused senses locked onto the real threat, the enemy hiding just out of sight, testing, waiting. Julia clutched the boy tighter, her face pale and wet with tears, realizing in that heartbeat that Bosch's presence was both the shield and the sword they desperately needed. A cold sweat trickled down her temple as she whispered, I had no choice. Bosch's jaw tightened, his mind calculating every enemy, every possible betrayal, every move he would make to protect them. Mini cliffhanger. From the hallway came the faintest metallic click, almost imperceptible, but Bosch froze, senses screaming. Someone had entered the ER unseen, and the real danger was about to strike. He pressed a hand gently but firmly on Julia's shoulder, whispered, "Stay behind me," and readied himself, every muscle, every nerve, every instinct coiled like a spring, ready to unleash destruction on anyone foolish enough to cross their path. Bosch's eyes stayed locked on the photograph, every detail etched into his mind. Julia smiling beside the enemy boss, the intimacy of it twisting the knife of betrayal deeper into his chest. The sterile lights of the ER reflected off the glossy image, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The boy whimpered softly in Julia's arms, a fragile sound that pierced Bosch's armor, grounding him in the urgent reality of the moment. His chest tightened, muscles coiling as rage and heartbreak warred within him. He wanted to scream, to strike, to tear apart the very walls of the hospital, but something deeper, more protective, held him in place. Julia's voice, low, trembling, broke the silence that had stretched taut between them. "After I left you, they found me. They wanted your head, Bosch, and I knew they'd never stop." Every word was a dagger wrapped in silk, soft yet cutting deep. Her hands shook as she pressed the boy closer, every movement betraying her exhaustion, her fear, and the weight of secrets she had carried for years. Tears fell freely now, glistening on her cheeks under the harsh hospital lights, each drop reflecting a story of sacrifice, pain, and survival. "So I made a deal," she continued, voice almost breaking entirely. "I'd give them everything they needed about your empire, in exchange for one thing, safety for my child." Bosch's jaw clenched until the muscles ached, his eyes narrowing into dark, lethal slits. He wanted to argue, to rage, to shake the truth out of her, but the fragility of the boy in her arms anchored him. The world they had built, the violence, the power, the fear he had wielded, it all hung suspended, fragile as glass, vulnerable in the face of her confession. "You were pregnant when you left?" His voice was low, dangerous, a growl wrapped in disbelief. Julia nodded slowly, eyes cast down, tears spilling freely. "And you hated me for leaving," she whispered, her voice trembling under the weight of memory. "But I did it to save him." Bosch felt his chest cave in as the revelation struck him. Every bullet he had fired, every life taken, every act of vengeance, all built on the lie of her absence, the lie that had consumed 5 years of his life. His hands trembled slightly, though he forced them to remain steady. The photograph slipped from his grip, falling onto the sterile tiles of the hospital floor with a dull thud that sounded impossibly loud in the charged silence. He took a breath, slow, controlled, trying to calm the storm of emotions threatening to consume him. His eyes moved to the boy, tiny and fragile, whose life had been the center of all her sacrifices. Bosch's hand brushed the child's cheek gently, almost unconsciously, grounding himself, reminding himself why he had to stay controlled, why rage had to be tempered with protection. Julia's gaze lifted, meeting his briefly, filled with a mixture of defiance, fear, and lingering love. Bosch's body tensed as the reality of her choices hit him fully. Another noise echoed from the hallway. A footstep, deliberate and slow, and Bosch's eyes snapped toward the sound. Muscles coiling instinctively, the ER seemed to shrink around them, walls pressing closer, the fluorescent lights flickering in response to the tension. Bosch's mind raced, calculating angles, entrances, exits, every possible threat in the vicinity. Julia's hands gripped the boy's tiny body tighter, her knuckles white with fear and desperation. Bosch exhaled, jaw tightening, heart hammering in his chest, and whispered softly, You did what you had to. I see that now." Before she could respond, a voice, familiar, chilling, cut through the tense air of the hospital. "She didn't tell you the full deal, did she?" Bosch's head snapped toward the hallway, instinct screaming danger. The voice was cold, deliberate, unmistakable. His most trusted ally, the man he had leaned on through blood, betrayal, and battles, now stood there. Gun raised and aimed directly at Julia. Time slowed, every heartbeat stretching into eternity as Bosch processed the impossibility of the scene before him. Julia froze, a gasp escaping her lips, her eyes wide with terror. The boy stirred slightly in her arms, tiny fingers twitching, unaware of the danger encroaching around them. Bosch's hands moved instantly, positioning himself between Julia and the gun, muscles coiled, eyes blazing, dark and lethal. Every instinct honed over decades of violence and leadership screamed, "Protect." The allies' eyes flicked briefly to Bosch, expression unreadable, calculating. Bosch's mind raced, 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 outcomes, all deadly, all urgent. Julia's voice trembled. "Bosch, please." The word barely a whisper, but it carried every ounce of fear, desperation, and trust she still dared to give him. Bosch's jaw tightened further, teeth grinding as he considered his next move, knowing one wrong step could cost the boy's life. The ally's finger twitched near the trigger, a subtle, dangerous movement that Bosch noted instantly. A flicker of motion in the doorway behind the ally suggested another presence, another potential threat, unseen, waiting to strike. Bosch's mind calculated the odds, the paths, the cover, the angles. Every shadow, every object in the room became part of the equation. Julia's breathing quickened, chest rising and falling rapidly, the boy's fragile form pressed tightly against her. Bosch's hands were steady, every muscle taut, ready to unleash destruction if necessary. "Put the gun down," Bosch said, voice low, lethal, commanding, his presence radiating power and danger. The allies smirked faintly, a gesture cold and unreadable. "I'm afraid the deal changed, Bosch. The terms are different now." Bosch's eyes narrowed, scanning every detail. The angle of the gun, the stance, the slightest shift in balance, every micro-expression betraying intent. Julia's hands shook violently around the boy, tiny fingers clutching the fabric of her coat as if it were a lifeline. Another sound. The distant echo of a dropped tray, a cough, footsteps, made Bosch pivot slightly, calculating threats beyond the immediate one. The ally's smirk faltered briefly, a shadow of uncertainty flickering in his gaze. Bosch seized it, muscles coiling, voice sharp as a blade. "Step back, or I swear." The words carried the weight of an empire, of lives taken, of vengeance accumulated over decades. Julia's lips trembled, silent tears falling onto the boy's head. Bosch's eyes softened momentarily, glancing at the child, remembering why all of this mattered. The ally shifted slightly, a subtle movement that Bosch noted instantly. A faint glint on the floor suggested a small object, a trigger, a wire, something unseen, threatening to explode the situation into chaos. Bosch's pulse raced, every breath calculated, muscles ready, mind racing with solutions, contingencies, and outcomes. He pressed himself slightly forward, subtly shielding Julia and the boy, whispering a silent vow, "No one will harm them while I stand." The ER, normally a place of healing, had become a battlefield, tension thick in the air, shadows dancing along the walls as if alive. Julia's soft whisper broke the silence again. "Bosch, don't let them." Bosch's eyes flicked toward hers, reading the desperation, the silent plea, the fear, and hope intertwined. The ally's finger twitched again, a deadly dance, testing, calculating, provoking. Bosch's hand brushed against the gun in his coat, fingers coiling around the cold steel, ready to act. The overhead lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the room. And in that fleeting moment, Bosch saw movement, not from the ally, but from the corner of the ER. Another shadow, another player in the deadly game, unseen but very real. Bosch's eyes narrowed, calculating, mind racing through years of strategy, tactics, and combat, muscles coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Julia's chest heaved, the boy's tiny whimpers filling the tension-heavy room. Bosch's lips pressed into a thin line, silent promise forming. No one would take them from him alive. Another distant sound, faint but deliberate, made Bosch pivot slightly, every sense alert. The ER transformed into a crucible of imminent violence. The photograph still lay on the floor, a testament to betrayal, sacrifice, and choices made in desperation. Bosch's mind processed every angle, every threat, every possibility, each one deadly. The ally shifted slightly, muzzle flicking toward the doorway again, and Bosch caught a faint glimmer. A reflection, a movement, something, or someone, about to change everything in the next heartbeat. Bosch pressed himself closer to Julia, whispering through clenched teeth, "Stay behind me. Don't move." Her hands tightened around the boy, tiny fingers clutching desperately, her eyes wide with terror and trust. The storm in Bosch's chest raged, but he remained coiled, controlled, lethal, prepared to unleash fury in a single calculated motion. The ally's smirk cut through the tense silence, cold and deliberate, the kind that carried years of calculation and a lifetime of arrogance. "She didn't sell you to the enemy, boss. She sold herself to me." The words hit Bosch like a fist to the chest, disbelief and fury colliding violently in his mind. Julia's tears streamed freely now, hot and fast, as she pressed the boy closer to her chest, whispering through sobs, "He saved Luca's life when he was born. I owed him." Bosch's stomach churned violently, the room tilting slightly as betrayal, rage, and confusion battled inside him. He could hardly breathe. "You made a deal with my right-hand man?" His voice was a low growl, controlled yet seething with pent-up fury that could ignite at any second. The ally shrugged casually, as if discussing the weather instead of betrayal and death. "She paid the debt, but now that you're back, the deal's void." Bosch's gaze sharpened, deadly, piercing the ally's facade, calculating every possible reaction, every move that could be a trap. The ally's hand twitched slightly, resting on the weapon aimed directly at Julia, and Bosch's chest tightened. Rage exploded within him, hot and uncontrollable, as years of betrayal and loss converged into a single, dangerous moment. Without a second thought, Bosch drew his gun in a fluid motion, every muscle coiled, instincts honed to perfection, ready to protect Julia and the boy at any cost. The hallway became a battlefield instantly. Shouts, alarms, the metallic echo of footsteps, and the smell of blood mingling with antiseptic, creating a sensory storm that pressed down on every nerve. Julia froze, trembling, hands shaking violently around Luca, her eyes wide with terror and relief as she realized Bosch was now her shield. The ally's finger squeezed the trigger slightly, testing, taunting, but Bosch's gaze was unflinching, unyielding, lethal. A shadow flickered behind the ally. Another presence, unseen, yet deadly, waiting to tip the balance of life and death. The first shot rang out, deafening in the narrow hallway, the sound ricocheting against the sterile walls, and Bosch moved instinctively, shielding Julia and the boy as chaos erupted. Bullets shredded the air around them, ricocheting off metal carts and the floor with sparks of danger that illuminated terrified faces of nurses and doctors diving for cover. Bosch's movements were precise, fluid, lethal, every shot calculated, every reflex honed through years of violence and leadership. Julia's hands pressed the boy tightly against her chest as she crouched behind a gurney, body shaking violently, praying for safety, for survival, for the man who had once been her world. A nurse screamed from the far end of the hallway, warning of another armed figure approaching silently, almost imperceptibly. Adding another layer of danger, Bosch's eyes darted, analyzing, predicting, calculating every trajectory, every possible threat. His gun barked again, echoing down the corridor, forcing the enemy into cover, a dangerous cat-and-mouse dance unfolding with lethal precision. Blood stained the tiles, a stark contrast to the sterile white of the hospital, proof of the stakes at hand and the price of betrayal. Julia gasped as a stray bullet grazed a wall just inches from her, dust and plaster falling around her like confetti of terror. Bosch's heart raced, pulse thundering, yet his hands were steady, his movements sharp and precise, lethal, protecting with a ferocity only he could summon. The boy whimpered, tiny hand reaching toward Bosch instinctively, drawing him into a protective circle as another shadow moved near the end of the hallway. Unseen, threatening, waiting for the right moment. The ally shifted, taking a step back, eyes calculating, aware of Bosch's skill, the deadly aura emanating from him like heat off steel. Bosch's jaw tightened as he fired again, each shot measured, aimed to disable, to neutralize, without harming Julia or Luca. Julia's breath came in shallow gasps, body pressed tight against Bosch, feeling the storm of his presence, the lethal power that protected them, the raw intensity that radiated from him like fire. The gunfight continued, bullets tearing through space, ricocheting off surfaces, leaving the hospital echoing with the sounds of life and death. A faint click sounded from the far hallway, metallic and precise. A gun being loaded or worse, another trap ready to spring, and Bosch's eyes narrowed instantly, every sense alert. He pivoted, assessing, scanning, muscles coiled, ready to strike at the first sign of threat, his protective instincts consumed by the need to shield Julia and the boy. Julia's hands shook violently, tears mixing with sweat, tiny fingers clutching the boy as she whispered, I betrayed myself. Bosch's eyes softened slightly, catching her words, the depth of her confession echoing through him even as his focus remained deadly, tactical, lethal. The ally's smirk faltered for a brief moment, realizing Bosch's skill and fury were unmatched, yet his finger stayed on the trigger, calculating, dangerous. A sudden loud crash from the ER supply room caused everyone to flinch, the sound reverberating, hinting at another possible enemy or trap, tension snapping tighter. Bosch's movements became a dance of lethal precision, protective instincts driving every step, every shot, every breath, his mind calculating outcomes, survival and revenge, simultaneously. Julia's soft whimpers filled the chaos-filled hallway, mingling with the echoes of gunfire and alarms, a haunting soundtrack to the life-or-death ballet unfolding around them. The boy coughed violently, small body trembling, drawing Bosch's attention and adding a layer of urgent, emotional vulnerability to the already high-stakes situation. Bosch's hand shot forward instinctively, steadying Luca, whispering fiercely, "You stay with me, kid. Not a scratch will come to you." The ally took another step, miscalculated slightly, and Bosch's gun barked, a precise shot disarming him, knocking the weapon away with surgical accuracy. The ally's eyes widened in shock, realization dawning that Bosch's control over the situation was absolute, unstoppable. The disarmed gun slid across the floor, stopping near a medical cart, potentially in reach for the ally, creating a new tension point. Bosch moved with lethal efficiency, closing the distance between him and the ally, every step measured, every motion precise, his presence a storm of wrath and protection. Julia pressed the boy tightly against her chest, gasping as she realized they were not yet out of danger, not fully safe, her body trembling violently. Bosch's rage honed into precision, exploded in a final controlled motion, incapacitating his ally with undeniable force, leaving him crumpled on the floor, chest heaving, eyes dark with fury and triumph. The gunfight ended as abruptly as it had begun. Silence falling over the hallway except for Bosch's heavy breathing and Julia's soft sobs. Blood stained the tiles, and Bosch stood over the fallen ally, chest heaving, muscles tense, mind still alert for any further threat. Julia trembled violently, hands shaking, tears streaming, covered in blood that was not hers, a cruel testament to the chaos they had survived. Bosch dropped his gun, voice low, hoarse, almost a whisper. "You didn't betray me, did you?" Julia's body shook as she collapsed slightly against him, sobbing, words barely audible. I betrayed myself to keep you breathing." From the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder with each passing second, signaling another wave of danger, and Bosch's eyes flicked toward the ER entrance, Julia's name flashing on a wanted list, now official, marking her as a target for the law. Bosch pressed himself closer to her, protective, dark, lethal, instinct screaming, mind calculating every next step as the storm outside and inside threatened to converge on them in a deadly symphony. The night air was thick with rain, the wet streets reflecting the flashing red and blue of police lights in the distance. Bosch Romano moved like a shadow, every step silent, calculated, covering Julia and the boy as they ran, ducking through alleyways and deserted streets. Julia clutched Luca tightly, his small body pressed against her chest, trembling slightly from exhaustion, fear, and the trauma of everything that had unfolded. Bosch's gun was never idle, always scanning, always ready, covering every angle, every possible threat that might emerge from the shadows. The night seemed alive with danger, the echo of sirens and distant gunfire chasing them relentlessly, a reminder that there was no turning back. A sudden screech of tires on wet asphalt behind them made Bosch's pulse spike. A car was following, silent but deadly. He led them into a narrow side street, ducking into the shadows, forcing the vehicle to slow and veer off their path. Julia's breathing was ragged, the boy's small whimpers mingling with the rain as she whispered, I can't do this anymore." Bosch's eyes, dark and lethal, softened just enough to catch her trembling gaze. "You don't have to," he murmured, though his mind raced with every step they took, every turn, every possibility of escape. A faint movement in the corner of a broken building caught his eye. Another potential threat, watching, waiting, calculating. They moved through abandoned warehouses and forgotten streets, Bosch always one step ahead, protecting, shielding, calculating. Julia's hands shook, pressing the boy closer, every nerve ending on fire with fear and adrenaline. "Bosch, do you hate me?" she whispered, voice cracking, eyes wet with tears she had been holding back for years. He shook his head slowly, muscles coiled but controlled, heart heavy. "No, I hate that I didn't see the truth." A faint sound of footsteps echoed behind them, light, deliberate, almost playful. Someone tracking them, someone dangerous. She stumbled slightly, exhausted, and he caught her instantly, steadying her, keeping her from collapsing. "I gave them your secrets," she confessed softly, voice breaking, "to buy our son's heartbeat. Every day since, I've died a little inside." Bosch pressed a hand to her cheek, wiping away tears with the back of his fingers, his own chest tightening at the weight of her sacrifice. "Then we die clean, together," he said, voice low, determined, almost like a vow to the storm of fate surrounding them. The distant wail of police sirens grew closer, echoing off the empty buildings, signaling that their time was running out. They ducked into an abandoned church. the massive wooden doors groaning in protest as they pushed them open. Inside, the pews were rotting, dust thick in the air, shafts of moonlight cutting through broken windows, illuminating the despair and desolation around them. Julia sank to the floor, still clutching Luca, her body trembling with relief and exhaustion. Bosch crouched beside her, scanning the darkness outside the broken windows, muscles coiled, senses sharp, prepared for anything. A shadow shifted near the altar, fleeting, suggesting they were not alone in the abandoned building. Julia's voice trembled as she looked at him, eyes haunted. "You hate me now, don't you?" Bosch shook his head, brushing her hair back gently. "No, I hate that I didn't see the truth." A distant crash from the roof made them both jump, debris falling from above, proof that danger was still imminent. She pressed the boy tighter against her, small body shaking, and whispered, "I gave them your secrets. Every day I lived, a little part of me died for him." Bosch's hands rested gently on her shoulders, steadying her, grounding them both. "Then we face it together," he said, voice firm, protective, promising safety in the storm of chaos around them. A flicker of light outside one of the broken windows hinted at movement, someone observing them, plotting, waiting. Bosch scanned the darkness, calculating escape routes, angles of defense, any possible advantage, instincts on high alert. Julia's tears fell freely now, mixing with rain and sweat. Her heart laid bare in confession. Bosch leaned close, brushing a tear from her cheek, whispering, "You did what you had to. That's all that matters." A faint creak echoed from the church's balcony, subtle but deliberate, suggesting another threat descending from above. The boy stirred slightly, tiny hands reaching toward Bosch instinctively, and Bosch's heart clenched, instinctively protective. He pressed the boy closer to Julia, shielding him with his own body, every sense alive to potential danger. Footsteps echoed down the church's main aisle, slow, measured, deliberate, someone approaching, with intent. Julia's gaze met his, haunted, fearful, pleading, and whispered, "Promise me. You'll tell him why I did it." Bosch's throat burned, words caught in his chest, voice rough and low. "Julia!" "No!" Police lights suddenly flooded the broken stained glass windows, red and blue painting the floor, signaling that they were completely surrounded. Bosch's muscles coiled, ready to act, instincts screaming, every movement calculated for protection, every breath prepared for violence. Julia's chest heaved, small arms clutching the boy tightly, eyes scanning the shadows for hope, for escape, for mercy. The distant sound of radio chatter echoed faintly through the church, confirming officers were closing in, every second ticking with deadly urgency. Bosch's eyes locked on her, dark, protective, lethal, ready to take on anyone, any force, any consequence. The tension was palpable, every heartbeat stretching into eternity as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Julia stood slowly, hands raised, small figure illuminated by the flashing police lights, tears streaming down her face, ready to take the blame. Bosch's mind raced. If she surrendered, could he save her? Could they survive the storm converging on them? The boy whimpered, tiny voice barely audible, and Bosch pressed a hand gently to his head, whispering, "Stay close. Stay alive." Julia's voice cracked as she stepped fully into the open, her hands raised in surrender, the weight of sacrifice and love heavy in every movement. Bosch's eyes scanned the approaching officers, enemies, and shadows, calculating every possible scenario, knowing that one wrong move could destroy everything they had fought for. The church echoed with tension, rain pattering through broken windows, the smell of wet wood and dust mixing with adrenaline and fear. Bosch's hand hovered near his weapon, ready, lethal, protective, every muscle coiled like a spring. In the reflection of a shattered window, Bosch caught a glimpse of someone else approaching silently from behind, unseen by the police, a new layer of danger waiting. Julia's gaze met his, silently communicating trust, sacrifice, love, and despair all at once. Bosch's chest tightened, voice low, lethal, protective. "I'm right here. Not a scratch will come to you or him if I can stop it." A shadow moved near the altar again, subtle, deliberate, suggesting someone was about to strike, testing their vigilance. Julia's body shook with fear and exhaustion. The boy pressed close, tiny whimpers echoing in the hollow church. Bosch adjusted his stance, calculating every angle, every threat, ready to move in a heartbeat, lethal and protective. The distant sound of sirens crescendoed, doors banging, officers shouting. The storm of danger was closing in, every heartbeat now a countdown. Julia's lips quivered as she whispered, I did it for him. For you. For us." Bosch's hand rested on her back, grounding her, protecting her, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the law and shadows alike. A figure appeared in the doorway. Blurred, unknown, dangerous. Forcing Bosch to react instantly, muscles coiled, gun ready. Julia's eyes widened in terror, pressing Luca closer, trusting Bosch implicitly. Bosch's mind raced, calculating every option, movement, outcome, every breath heavy with tension and anticipation. A sudden shout outside the church, echoing in the empty halls, indicated that the police were entering the building, their presence imminent, and the tension spiked. Julia's chest heaved, hands shaking violently, tears streaming, boy clutched close, preparing for sacrifice. Bosch's voice was low, dark, lethal. "Stay behind me, not a move, not a sound, not a breath out of place." The shadow from the balcony shifted, just enough to hint at another player in this deadly game, unseen, but lethal. Julia stepped fully into the light, raising her hands, taking the blame, her eyes wet with tears, the embodiment of sacrifice and love. Bosch's gaze darted to the far corners of the church, calculating, ready, knowing danger was far from over, and survival now depended on his every move. Months passed like the slow turning of a cold, gray tide. The chaos, the gunfire, the betrayals, the stolen moments of love, all of it felt like a distant nightmare as Bosch Romano walked along the winding road outside the city. The rain had long ceased, leaving a soft mist that clung to the fields, the earth smelling faintly of rain and renewal. His coat was heavy on his shoulders, yet lighter than the weight he carried in his chest, the weight of memories, loss, and a love that had burned too bright to survive. Luca's small hand slipped into his, fingers trusting, grasping, holding on for comfort, for safety, for life. Bosch's gaze was fixed ahead, eyes dark with a storm of grief tempered by the faintest glow of hope. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the faintest whisper of Julia's laughter, a ghost of the past that made Bosch pause and tighten his grip on Luca. They walked in silence, the kind of silence that speaks volumes, filled with unspoken words and memories, too heavy for voices. Bosch's mind traveled back to that night, the abandoned church, Julia's sacrifice, her tears, her courage, her love, the way she had stepped into the light, taking the blame, saving them all in a single heartbeat. He could still feel her trembling hands, her whispered confessions, the warmth of her breath on his skin. A lone bird flew across the gray sky, startling Luca, a small reminder that life moved even in grief. The cemetery was quiet, isolated, a small patch of green and stone in the midst of rolling fields. Bosch led Luca to a grave tucked beneath an ancient oak, the roots like fingers of memory wrapping around the earth. The stone was simple yet elegant, etched with words that carved themselves into Bosch's chest with every breath. Julia Romano, beloved mother, braver than heaven allowed. Bosch's chest tightened as he read the words aloud softly, voice thick, trembling slightly. He knelt, placing Luca gently beside him, and the boy's small fingers brushed against his, grounding him, reminding him of why they had survived, why they had run, why they had fought. A crow cawed from a nearby tree, startling both father and son, the sound echoing like an omen in the quiet. Luca tilted his head, eyes wide and innocent, voice small and tentative. "Dad, did Mom really do bad things?" Bosch swallowed hard, his throat tight, and forced a smile, though the ache behind it was raw, unrelenting. "She did what angels do," he said softly, voice breaking. "She fell so we could stand." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a single white rose, delicate and pure against the cold gray world around them. He placed it gently on the grave, whispering, "You broke me to save me." The wind rustled the leaves above, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth, and Bosch closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment to grieve, to remember, to love. A flash of sunlight broke through the clouds, catching on the rose, illuminating it as if signaling a silent blessing from the one they had lost. As Bosch turned to leave, a small piece of paper slipped from Luca's pocket. Falling gently to the ground, he bent to pick it up, recognizing the elegant, familiar handwriting instantly. Julia's words stretched across the page like a soft, urgent breath. "If you're reading this, it means I kept my promise. He'll grow up free of blood and guns. Bosch, don't come looking. Just live." Bosch's lips trembled, eyes stinging. The weight of her love, her sacrifice, and her wisdom pressing down on him. The wind picked up, carrying the faintest echo of Julia's voice, whispering, reminding him of the life they had built together, the son they had saved, and the promises kept. He folded the letter carefully, holding it against his chest, feeling the warmth of her words seep into his heart, soothing the ache, the emptiness, the loss. Luca tugged at his sleeve, eyes wide and searching. "Dad, will we be okay?" Bosch knelt, brushing a strand of hair from his son's face, voice low, steady, yet tinged with raw emotion. "Yes, kid, we'll be okay, because she gave us a chance. She gave you life. And now, we live it." In the distance, the faint sound of a church bell rang, its solemn toll echoing across the fields, marking the passage of time, of memory, of love. They stood together in silence for a moment longer, the wind soft, the mist drifting, the gravestone before them, a monument to courage, sacrifice, and a love too deep for words. Bosch's eyes lifted to the sky, clouds parting slightly, a hint of sunlight breaking through, warm and golden, as if blessing the moment, forgiving the past, and allowing them to breathe again. He smiled through tears, a smile heavy with sorrow, hope, and gratitude. "You always win, Julia," he whispered, voice breaking. "Even when you lose." Luca tilted his head, looking at Bosch, sensing the weight of the moment, the love lost and the love that remained, innocent eyes reflecting the light of hope. Bosch held his son's hand tightly as they walked away from the grave, each step forward a promise, a vow to live, to honor Julia's sacrifice, to protect Luca, and to embrace the life they had been given. The road ahead was uncertain, dangerous, yet brighter for the love they carried, the lessons they had learned, and the bond that death could not sever. The wind carried the faintest scent of roses, a reminder that love never truly dies, that memories linger, and that even in absence, presence remains. Luca spoke softly, voice small but determined. "Dad, will we remember her?" Bosch knelt once more, gathering his son into his arms, holding him close. Feeling the heartbeat, the warmth, the promise of life. "Every day," he whispered, tears streaming freely. "We remember her in every breath, every choice, every moment. She lives in you, Luca, and through you, she lives in me. The mist shifted, revealing the first hints of dawn breaking on the horizon, light spilling into the world, carrying with it hope, renewal, and the quiet victory of love. They walked together, side by side, father and son, hearts heavy yet resolute, the past honored, the present embraced, and the future wide open. Bosch glanced down at Luca, small and brave, and whispered, "We survive because of her. And now we live." The distant song of a morning bird, a symbol of freedom, echoed across the field, carrying with it a sense of peace, promise, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. Bosch paused, looking back at the grave one final time, the rose still gleaming in the soft morning light, and whispered, "Goodbye, Julia. Thank you for everything." Luca's small hand squeezed his, grounding him, reminding him that life continued, that love endured, and that sacrifices were never in vain. The sky above them cracked with a single beam of sunlight, illuminating the path forward, signaling a new beginning after darkness and loss. The two walked away from the grave, hearts heavy but alive, carrying the lessons, the love, and the sacrifices with them. Bosch glanced down at Luca, smiling through tears, the weight of the past balanced by the promise of tomorrow. "We'll make it, kid," he said softly, "because she gave us the chance, and we won't waste it." The wind shifted again, brushing past them like a whisper, a reminder that Julia's presence, her love, and her courage would always be with them, guiding them forward. As they disappeared down the misty path, Bosch's voice carried softly into the morning air, filled with reverence, grief, and hope. "Because some betrayals," he whispered, voice low but resolute, "are written not in hate, but in love too deep to survive honesty. Some stories don't end with goodbye. They end with a sacrifice that love demands. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll. Subscribe to Heart-Woven Tales, where every heartbeat hides a story you'll never forget."